Hey everybody, welcome back to the Marmoset toolback part of our Sword tutorial. And if you remember when we left the 3D Max part, we were exporting Sword_low and then a separate version for texturing. And in that case, we want to only have the Sword_low. So it already came in here with the material that we assigned in Max, or at least the name of it. And now we just have to go in here, add our normal map, and we want to flip it on the Y channel. That's just necessary. And then the roughness, we have to actually confirm that it's roughness and not gloss. Let's also put our roughness map in there, and then we're gonna do the same thing here for the albedo. And you want to click in that color box and put it to a white. Sometimes it comes in with already a color assigned to it based on what we had in 3D Max. So here, let's switch that to metalness and also add our metalness map. It's the same as in Substance Painter. If you press Shift, it will rotate the sunlight direction. Over here where it says emissive, we have to actually confirm that it's supposed to use emissive, and then let's click on it and add our emissive map. So this is the setup that we had in Substance Painter that we exported out. And now let's go over here to our skylight, and I want to use Ennis House here. So now you see that we have this preview window here. I'm gonna click into it here where we have this door. So it does matter where you place this light. You can always drag it around. And I'm gonna increase our brightness and child brightness, and also here our backdrop brightness and backdrop blur. If you want, you can follow entirely with the same digits that I put in there. And then here where we have this wheel, let's turn on global illumination. And you will see how that makes a big difference. If we put it here to high voxel resolution, we get the best quality out of it, but you can see how that slows things down a lot. So I'm just gonna put it to medium, and I'm only using the high setting when I make the actual render. Otherwise we can stay here in the medium quality. We also want to turn on local reflections. And then we also want to enable our ambient occlusion here. You might barely see something, but it does add a little bit to it. And as a next thing, let's go over to our main camera settings. This one over here. And let's take a look at all the good stuff that we have in here. So first of all, I'm usually a fan of having a pretty small field of view. Let's also enable the save frame here, or at least I'm going to show you what it does. When you go over here to settings, it will exactly display you here our resolution of 9020 by 1080 from our later screenshot, or render I should say. Let's go over here to the curves. And I want to add a little bit more contrast here in the darks and in the bright tones with just these 2 points here. Let's press Shift to rotate a bit the light, and I always like it when the light comes in from one side and the other side is not too affected. Then we have the chromatic aberration here, which I also like to add a bit, but keep it really subtle. Then we have our sharpness here and our vignette. I always like to make use of the vignette. You can see if you crank it all the way up what happens, and then the softness to basically blur it out. So I'm gonna have quite a bit of this vignette. I always like that, like I was saying. If you press space, you get into that full screen view here. So that's pretty much almost as if you're looking at the finished render then. Let's go back here to the camera and see what else we got. We have the bloom here. And as you can see, this adds a serious amount to it. As a next thing, let's add 2 more lights here. Basically, we have then a 3-point light setup. And I want to have this third light down here. Both of them here into these whites. And then let's change the child brightness a bit, lower it down. And if we select sword_low here in the browser, it will give us this gizmo here, where we can then rotate it a bit to get a bit of a more interesting angle here with this rotation in it. And that already makes a pretty cool render here. Pressing Shift to adjust a bit the light direction. And like I was saying before, I like it if it comes from one source. I'm gonna go back here to our camera settings and I'm gonna lower the field of view even more, down to around 20. Here in our material settings, we can also play around with our emissive intensity. And most importantly, I wanna give it a bit of a purple look here. Maybe this is a bit too purple, so let's just take it a bit more into a blue region here. And then we can also crank up the intensity even more. If we put it to 100, you will see how it really reflects thanks to the global illumination. But that might be a bit too much. I'm gonna have it here at 20, at least for now. And now let's go back here to the main camera settings and enable the depth of field. And you want to use this focus distance here until you get something that looks really nice. I want to have the focus here on that REM hat. And now back here on our 3D model, I'm going to just give it a bit more of a rotation here so that it's really nicely framed. Also in our camera settings, let's make use of this flare slider here. I'm gonna bring the size down, and the strength, I also don't want to have so much of it here. And let's also play around here with the threshold. And then down here where we have the bloom, this one is another important one. You can see how it obviously gives it a lot of this nice shiny edges, and we don't want to exaggerate it too much. We just want to have a decent amount of it, which will definitely help to make a more impressive render. So speaking of render, let's go over here to our settings once more and see what it looks like if we put it to the highest setting for global illumination here, where it says voxel resolution. And let's just make a render. Capture, image, and open. Under the image tab, you already see the settings that we had earlier. And here we go with a very nice render. And you see the save frame that we have is exactly showing us what we were just rendering. So that way you always know what you're gonna get. So let me put the sword back here to its original position where we had that rotation. Just gonna put 0 back in there. And let's just take a look at it here from the front. As you can see, we can have another interesting angle here on it. And I forgot to put the GI back to medium so that it's not so slow. And now also what we want to do is maybe crank up the backdrop brightness a bit. And under our camera settings, most importantly, we can then adjust the focus distance here so that we actually see more of that whole thing. So you can have the blur coming at the front and disappear at the back, or the other way around. And that way we already have another cool looking render here. Maybe you want to have the light coming like this here. And another thing that we can add is when we go over here to where it says scene, add object, and let's add some fog. Let's put the color here to some dark blue. That's usually what I like. Well, it depends on the scene, but here for that sword we already have this kind of a blue theme with the emissive. And then we can use the sliders here on the distance and the max opacity. And what that essentially does is, like the name suggests, we add some extra fog layer there in the background of our 3D model. And that way we don't have the actual skylight background so dominantly in the scene. We can pretty much override it with some fog information. Just gonna lower the intensity of our emissive. Try to get a different lighting angle here. Once again, this looks nice here with the light coming from the left and the shadows on the right side. And now let's see if we can get an interesting angle here from the side view, where we have both of our ram skulls pretty much here. And let's go over to our main camera settings, scroll down here, and let's add a bit more of this vignette here to it. The vignette is definitely helping to frame it more. And let's also not forget that we are completely flexible with our color here for the emissive. That's why we exported it out as a white emissive in Substance Painter. But essentially I just wanted to be this blue, kind of a purple look, which I think suits it really well here with that theme. Let's also get an interesting angle here on our snake head, which is of course also worthy of a render on its own. And let's just have it here from the side. We can also go over here and rotate it if we select our sword_low there in the browser. And that way we don't always have to zoom out like this here and physically rotate it. We can just use these sliders there, but usually I find it easier just to do the big rotation part here in the viewport, and then we can always just use these sliders there under transform on the left to get a bit more of a refined angle. And let's position it here like this. Also play with our light direction if we press shift. And most importantly here, the depth of field was out of focus. So this was just to demonstrate. If you wanted, you could make a render here from that position, or of course make your own perspective. And speaking of perspective, let's make another interesting camera angle here where we have the sword coming in from the upper left and then pointing down there to the right. I'm just going to reposition the rotation here, which sometimes makes it easier than to get the right camera view on it if it's set back to default, the rotation. I'm going to disable the fog, and I also want to, for the moment, disable the depth of field here. Let's position that here a bit more, and then we can work here with our sunlight direction. And of course we can also do the same thing here from the other side, where it's pointing to the bottom left. So we are entirely flexible here with our camera settings and with our rotation of the 3D model. We can do every angle that we want. And speaking of that, as the next thing, I would like to have the sword pretty much vertically positioned. So I'm gonna put it here to back to 0 on the rotation. And then let's just position the camera so that we have it here coming down like this. And now let's go over here to where it says settings, and let's give this here a different format. So let's put it to, let's say, I want to have it here at 1600 and then 2600. Maybe make that a bit smaller. Let's give this here 1400, say OK. And here we have another interesting render especially now if the light here once again comes from one source. Let's see how it looks like with the fog. Let's work on our distance here. And I'm gonna make it a bit darker or desaturated so that it's not so intense, this blue color from the fog. Let's also work here with our ambient sky and the lights. Over here on the right side at the material, we can also change the horizontal occlusion here on the reflection, which might make a bit of a difference, but sometimes it's hard to see, so it's worth playing around with it. And also I want to have the intensity on our emissive map here put to 100. And now here under our sampling settings, keep in mind that if you put that all the way here to 100, you get the best quality, well, or 400 if you want to wait that long. Usually for me that takes too long. I'm gonna have it at 50 for individual renders. In that case I put it on a lower setting because I'm recording the tutorial, but it's up to you how long you want to wait. If you put the sampling rate all the way up, then it's just gonna take longer, but you get the best quality. So let's put it back to 1920 by 1080 here, our document resolution. And once again, this is a nice render here. Let's go over here to our main camera. And I just want to show you, if we press Ctrl D on that, we get a copy of this camera. I'm gonna just call it, to keep it simple, new camera. And then here we can toggle that. So now we have the view of the new camera, and if we go back into the old camera, it will jump back where we left it. Unless of course we physically move the 3D model around in the viewport. So I want to get a different angle here on that blade. And just to demonstrate what I just said, I'm gonna jump back here to this ram skull, and then here, new camera, we're back to the blade part that we were just positioning here. So that way you can have different cameras in the scene, covering different angles once you like an angle, and you don't lose it. Or what I usually do, I just save out different Marmoset scenes because they are not very polygon heavy. You just save that scene out with a different view, and that way you load it up and you have exactly the same lighting, and it's really up to you what you prefer. I'm gonna go back here to this new camera that we're just in, and I want to make another render here and show you how to use it together with Photoshop. So first of all, let's switch that here to heat, where it's set emissive. And that way we can have this really cool looking effect here that looks like some molten steel, which also suits it very well here. You can also crank up the bloom if you like this kind of a look. Like I said before, I prefer to keep it subtle. And here on our fog, I'm just gonna decrease the lighting on it so that the background becomes a bit darker. And let's find an interesting angle here on this. Maybe a bit here with a top-down perspective. Let's put our GI resolution here to high. And then let's make a render, image and open, which takes a bit to load. I'm actually not cutting this part out. So you see it even tells me it's not responding, but here we go. So next I'm gonna start Photoshop here in the background. And then let's right click on this render image and edit here in Photoshop. So here we have it. And now I'm just gonna use Google, and I wanna have something here like fire sparkle. And then let's put the size to large so we don't get all these small images. And for example, let's take this one here. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but this one looks pretty cool here, so I'm gonna paste it in. And then let's put it to screen. And by the way, sorry that I don't provide this image, but I don't want to risk any copyright violations. So that's why I just show you how to find that in Google Images pretty much, or any search engine of your choice. So I'm going to go back here to Marmoset. Let's put it back to emissive. And then let's have our blue purplish kind of a color tone here. Gonna desaturate it a bit so that it's not so neon. And now let's just find a more interesting angle here, because I'm gonna go back here to capture and render this one. And once this is done, we're going to also import it to Photoshop. And right after that, we're gonna add another render image with transparency. So here's the new image. I'm just gonna snap it out here, press Shift to drag it into the old file where we already have the sparks in it. Let's double click this background layer, which then will bring up this dialog so that we can snap it out of this frozen state. Let's press Ctrl J on this spark layer and put it on top of our new render image. So as the next thing, let's add an adjustment layer, and I want it to be the hue and saturation. Pressing Alt will connect it to our underlying image, and that means that now we can use this hue and saturation slider here, for example, to make these sparks here also purple. Let's go back to these sparks, the main image, and let's lower the opacity a bit so that this is not so noisy. And this is essentially how you can make a cool looking render here in Photoshop. So let's go back here to our capture settings. Let's enable transparency, confirm that, and then let's render out another image here that has the transparency on it, which then takes a while longer than the regular image, because of course calculating all the alpha information takes its time. But with this image then we have the option to put it on top of our current sparks that we have in Photoshop. Let's just wait till it's done here, and now right click, open with, and also edit. And you see we have some alpha information there in the back. And as you can see, it's not entirely transparent, and this is because we have the fog enabled here. So if you disable the fog and you make that same render with the transparency, it will be a perfect alpha image. But with the fog, we get a bit of this information here together with it. So I'm just gonna press Shift and drag this image here into our old stack. And now it's kind of caught here in between the adjustment layer. I'm just gonna drag it out and press Alt to unlink this image here with our hue and saturation that we had below it. And basically that means that the sparks that are under this new render with the transparency are not visible unless we change the opacity. I'm actually gonna delete this, and then with the same settings here, just gonna disable our fog, and let's just render out another image here with the transparency on it, but this time without the fog. It's already loading there in the background, but just to really make clear that this fog information that we had before is quite dense, and in that case it might be better to just have it like this here. Bring that into Photoshop, because let's not forget that the fog is already part of the original image that we have at the bottom, so we don't really need that twice. And now if we toggle that, you will see how the sparks are not visible unless we put the opacity down. So now let's select these layers here with Shift, and if you press Ctrl G, you put them in a group. And now let's just call it render 1 and render 2. And that's essentially it here, that I wanted to show you how to make a cool looking collage here in Photoshop. And let's also go back here to Google, or Google Images in that case. And let's add something else here, such as smoke. And let's see which image here we can use for it. I want to have a nice contrast here with black and white. And this one, it seems like it's not loading. So I'm going to use this one, copy image. And then here on our second render, let's paste it here over the sparks that we have. And let's just scale it up. And you can see once again how this looks cool here with this ram hat on top of it. And if we toggle the opacity, it looks like it's coming through fog. And you can see how we are flexible here to have our layer hierarchy in a different way. If we, for example, push these sparks here on top of the alpha image. So now we have the smoke under it and the sparks on top. And essentially we are as flexible as we want to be here with these renders or this collage in Photoshop. And it's just a lot of fun. So yeah, this is the Sword Marmoset part of the tutorial. And to those of you who were sticking throughout the whole tutorial from the beginning to the end, I just want to say respect and congratulations. And of course, I hope that you learned a lot as we were creating that sword and that you will be able to create your own cool stuff with it. So I hope that I'll see you in the next tutorial. Subscribe to my ArtStation and Facebook and also join our Discord. And that's pretty much it from me. Have a good one. Cheers.